Alright. After some technical assessments, to figure out about sound, we're going to keep going. I think you had just been with comparing boot camp with living with the Jesuit education system from the church.
And the Sisters of Perpetual Guilt.
Yeah, now you may have to talk louder, like I said. You may have to talk louder, so just so you know.
Okay, I'll raise my volume a bit and maybe we can get this across to the camera. We were very militant at St. Stephen's. The reveille went at 4 o'clock in the morning. You had to get into the bathroom, take a shower, brush your teeth, get dressed, come out, make your bed just like in the Marine Corps, and then you fall out on the grinder outside the building in formation, and then you were marched off to chapel. It was not what you would consider a fun childhood. My father was a career Marine. After I was 8 years old, I didn't see him again until I was 24. My mother and he got divorced, and my stepfather came into the picture. He was probably the most influential individual in my life during my early years of 7th grade, 8th grade, and then on into junior high and through high school, and we moved a lot. He was a industrial engineer, and the jobs he worked on made him move a lot. So I was exposed to an awful lot of different cultures within our own culture. We now come to the, quote, formative years as far as athletics went. My dad was a internationally talented track man.
Now you're talking about Pete Butterfield now.
Right. It's my stepdad.
The career Marine guy, yeah.
When I refer to my dad, I'm referring to my stepdad. He ran for College. He ran for Iowa State University. He ran for the University of Iowa. And I believe he ran for Ames. Dad never stayed more than 1 year at any one university. He's a very intelligent individual, and he had a philosophy that has kind of guided me my entire life. He taught me how to run. Starting in the 7th grade, he would teach me the form to run in, and I'd go running in the woods, and he would correct my form and put me on a training schedule, and I ran from the 7th grade and 8th grade. I practiced with the high school teams. I had a talent for it, and I enjoyed it. Then Dad started what carried me on throughout the rest of my life. He started teaching me the philosophy of competition, which goes over into my philosophy of life. He said, when you're running a half a mile and you're out front, don't look back to see who's coming up behind you. Because if you look back to see who's coming up behind you, he'll be ahead of you. He said, you run your own race and you ignore the rest of the field. And the philosophy on it is, the beginning is important. This is talking half mile now. The beginning is important, the first 220 yards. You come out of the hole and you run so that you've got a good position up front. I wasn't a sprinter, I was a pacer. Then you go for the first quarter, the first 220, and you slow down a little bit and relax. You go through the quarter mile at a good solid pace, making sure that you were out front. Now comes the strategy. The third 220 is the hardest one in the race, because everyone out there has been taught to run hard in the quarter mile and then slack off in the third 220 in order to gain the power and the breath and the energy to finish with a, quote, kick.
Right, I've heard that.
To be able to put all your energy into the finishing project. He said that's not where you win or lose. You win or lose in the third 220. If when the others slow down, that's when you go hard, you don't have to kick. You're far enough out in front that you win. I did very, very well in high school. I won the state, set several records for high school, half miles in Iowa, and went on to speed skating. Same concept, same philosophy. Never look back. If you're going to do it, you do it all the way, and you win. Not necessarily win by breaking the tape and coming across, but you win by winning over yourself and disciplining yourself so that you run that third 220 harder than anybody else. And that's where you win and lose in life. You don't coast along in life and then take a rest during the Middle Ages and then try and run into your latter life, putting your world together. You learn how to do things properly. You learn how to be honest with yourself, because the only one that can judge you when you're out there on a track is you. Track's not a glamorous sport. I ran well enough in high school, set a couple of state records, and in my senior year in high school, I got several offers to different colleges around the country for track scholarships, all the way from Fordham University to the universities in the Midwest. My dad's teammate from college, one of the colleges he went to, was Kretzmeyer. He was very well known, and he was lead coach in the Big Ten at that time. So I went to the University of Iowa on a full ride. To back up just a bit, when I turned 17, I was still in high school, and on my 17th birthday, I went down, because we were in the Korean War then. On my 17th birthday, I went to the Navy Reserve and I joined the Navy Reserve. I stayed in the Navy Reserve for 4 years. I got active duty in the summer times. I went through the Naval Reserve Officers Training Program. I had quite a few cruises with the reserve and enjoyed it. But during that same time in high school, I was competing in all different types of sports. One of them was wrestling. I loved to wrestle. But Marion, Iowa, where I was going to high school, is a rural city. And it's surrounded by farms, big farms. And the kids in the school, we only had 350 population in the school, in the entire school. My graduating class was 67 people.
It's not big.
We absolutely controlled the basketball and the track segments of inter-high school sports. Small school, but a tremendous coach, and a whole lot of philosophical belief in what you could do if you pushed yourself hard enough. When I went to Iowa in 1954, or 1953. In 1953, I was a freshman. I'm sorry, I'm making this. In 1952, I was a freshman at Iowa, and Kretzmeyer entered me in the Big Ten Indoor 2-mile championship. I wasn't a 2-miler. I ran the 880. Sometimes I would run a mile, but I wasn't that type of a runner. However, during the Big Ten Indoor Championships, I followed Dad's philosophy, and I won the Big Ten Indoor 2-mile championships. Going back to my high school days and wrestling, my neighbors wrestled. They would wrestle in their backyard. They were a Japanese family that was engaged in chicken sexing. In other words, they had to. The capon was a very popular bird in those days because it got almost as big as a turkey. But it was actually a chicken, but it was a desexed chicken.
Right.
And that's why it got so big. Well, in order to know whether or not to caponize a chicken, you had to know whether it was male or female. The Japanese at that time had a secret. Nobody else could do it. They can now, but back then they couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Only the Japanese. And the Japanese could pick up a bird during its second or third day of birth, turn it over and put it back down on a conveyor belt, and with about a 90% accuracy, tell whether it was male or female.
Right.
They got 10 cents a bird. Now this was back when upper middle class made $400 a month. The Japanese made, well, what they needed a white porcelain bowl, a 100-watt light bulb, and a $4,000 car.
Yeah. I think. Yeah. What's that thought? I think it's extremely interesting. I like the whole the profession. I wonder if they figured that out since, and you know, because we talked about that the last time we filmed, but I wonder if science has figured that out so that they don't need folks that look at them anymore.
They don't need people.
They're like, you know, whatever.
But at that time, they had
That's pretty cool.
the, tied up. In my neighborhood were one family of chicken sexers and another family of capernizers. And they would get out in their backyards and wrestle, but they didn't wrestle like I did.
Right.
They moved a whole lot more. They moved standing up straight instead of bending over. And when they took an individual to the ground, instead of shooting in and taking the legs out like a tackle like we did, they would foot sweep and the guy would go down, or they would hook a leg and the guy would go over, or they'd put a hip in front of him and throw him, and then pin him. Well, I was getting my butt kicked by the farm kids. Now, why should I get my butt kicked by the farm kids in wrestling? It's because wrestling, the way we did it, you had to be strong. You had to have strong arms and you had to have strong hands. Those farm kids got up every morning and they milked cows. They got home in the evenings and they pitched hay and they farmed, and they were strong. Once I started working, standing up and working like my neighbors did, I started winning. Because I wasn't getting tired out. I didn't have to be strong. It was a matter of leverage, and I loved it. That was my introduction to, quote, the martial arts. Everything back then was called judo.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't matter what you were doing, it was called judo.
I read that actually in the most recent book you gave me was on Kano. That's funny because Professor Kano, you know, the inventor of judo and so forth, and actually in his day, he designed and invented judo in his day, but there were a lot of things in Japan at the time. Judo was a word that they used.
Right.
So it's very important when you play judo to tell people you play Kodokan judo, not just judo. Because there's lots of it. And I never knew that. You know, it seems like a kind of a simple fact to not know if you're a judo player, but it matters. Kodokan judo, because there was a lot of judo. People referred to a lot of things as judo then.
Kodokan judo means the school to practice the way of the gentle art.
Mm-hmm.
There is not a damn thing gentle about judo.
No.
But I'm digressing now.
No, digress away.
When I went into the Navy, I got to play judo at Great Lakes, and then in San Diego and in Long Beach, and I did pretty well. Again, we weren't practicing Kodokan judo at that time. We were practicing a form of wrestling, and we called it jiu-jitsu. Things were not going well at school. Things were not going well in my social life. And things at home, even though I was now living with a quote family. I had my younger brother, my dad, and my mother, who was an interesting story in herself. She had been raised in the jungles in Dutch Suriname and Dutch Guyana, and then as a teenager had gone to New York City, where she searched for herself for several years. I don't think she ever found herself. But she had an interesting life. I didn't live with her.
Now, let me ask you, you've done this a lot of times throughout history that I've been at the table talking and discussing stuff. Do you resent your mom?
Do I
Resent your
my
mom?
mother?
Did you have bad feelings? I mean, because you always express them sarcastically or with humor, but you almost always come to where it's not. It berates her a little bit offhandedly, and I just wonder, is there something you wish you had said to her while she was alive, or did you say stuff while she was alive to let her know that did she drop the ball in places when she was not raising you, or?
She didn't give me, she didn't add to my, quote, social education or family type education. Everything was about her.
Right.
Uh,
Well, what was the longest span, just for instance, what was the longest span you went in your youth without seeing your mom because you were in schools? How long did you go in between times, or what was the longest span that you didn't see your mom?
I saw her. She would every once in a while would come visit. But my grandmother raised me until the second grade. In the second grade, I started into the boarding schools.
Right.
My mother at the time had a significant other that was a very wealthy individual from Florida.
Did you know him?
Yes.
Did you resent him?
No, I liked him.
You liked him. Okay. Well,
He didn't have a whole lot to do with me. He had a whole lot to do with my mother. He was a married individual. He was in who's who. Very wealthy entrepreneur from Florida, and he provided quite luxurious quarters for my mother in New York City. Second World War was breaking out. My mother went to work. She was an excellent secretary. She got to be the lead secretary for the USO and in New York City. But she and her friend there were together until he died. During that period, he paid for my education. He had me go to these boarding schools, and they weren't the Catholic boarding schools anymore.
right.
The boarding schools that he sent me to were, for example, I went second and third grade to a boarding school in Scarsdale. It was run by a British sea captain and his wife. It was very exclusive and very upscale.
Now,
I did not have a poor life.
I know, but from as an adult looking back and gaining a lot more worldly knowledge of how things work, it's nice. It's great that he sent you to very good schools, and it probably accounts for a lot of the early depth of an extremely good education, which it'd be good to go across your philosophy of education, which I'm both a beneficiary and a victim of. But I wonder, I'll stop asking about resentment, but did you feel like you were put in those schools because you wouldn't fit in around the house because of this lifestyle that she had going on?
Yeah,
Were you moved off to the side so that you weren't, so that he could visit his lady friend without hindrance?
That was rather obvious even at that age.
There you go, that's what I want.
You know, I was the result of an unusual situation between my actual father, my mother, and her significant other.
Mm-hmm.
And she figured if she got pregnant, that her significant other there would probably become her permanent partner. It didn't work out that way. When my dad and my mom got married, That was the first time I had a taste of actual home life.
Yeah, because Pete Butterfield, your dad,
Yeah.
that I knew, that was way cool. He made that happen. He insisted on it. That was not the fault of your mother.
That was not my mother. When he got married, a few months after they were married, he says we're a family, and he took me out of the boarding schools and had me have a quote family type life by the time I was in the 6th grade. Anyway, that's all another story. It's probably an interesting story. My mother and my father got divorced because with the war, he was stationed down at Quantico, and then he was over in the Pacific. She didn't want to live that way. She stayed up in New York and continued her own lifestyle.
Was he okay with that?
My father?
Yeah. Was he disappointed? Did he beg her to stay in the marriage?
No, he was disappointed in it. He actually loved me more than I think. I didn't see him again until I was 24 years old.
What were the circumstances of that? How come you saw him? You went to see him? You wanted to see him?
He had 5 brothers. All of them had been in the service. 4 of them had been on the same ship, battle wagon. 2 of those were Marines, and 3 of them, 2 were Marines and 2 were sailors. My dad was in the Marine Corps during a very exciting piece of Marine Corps history. He was in the quote Banana Wars down in Central America. We got to talking one day after we got back together, and I was in the Corps.
Mm-hmm. Now, when was that? When you said when you were about 24, you say?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the circumstance. You were in the service, and you saw your dad, and you were comparing some notes because you were both Marines. So it's almost like there's your father and son, but it's also 2 Marines talking.
Yeah. Well, that's more. He and I never did have a father-son relationship. We had a real good friendship throughout our entire life. After I got back together with him, the things that he talked about were history in the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm.
He and the platoon he was in, that he was platoon sergeant for, went into Chipotle on the 1st Marine amphibious attack, and then into the jungles.
Yeah.
His platoon leader was Chesty Puller. That was the first time in Marine Corps in history that the services used air infantry coordinated attacks.
What was it? What about the year would that be? Because I think I know what you're talking about.
That was in the 30s.
Yeah, because in the 30s, airplanes weren't completely up to snuff modern just yet. I mean, the guys literally were shooting guns from the cockpit.
Well, we had air infantry tactics right after their first operation in Chipotle. We didn't have sea rations. They didn't have sea rations back then.
Right.
As they were going through the jungle, they came across a cow, and the platoon drove the cow ahead of them until nightfall, and that was supper.
So you probably learn how to skin out a cow in your service years, huh?
Then they went into Chipotle, and during the attack in Chipotle, a biplane came over.
Right.
And they were fighting on the ground, and the biplane came over the enemy, and the guy in the front seat, because the plane was actually flown from the back seat.
Right.
the guy in the front seat, who was navigator, he pulled the pins on grenades and threw them down on the enemy.
It can be hazardous because they have history in other history that I've seen that with
But that,
adrenaline-filled points could get the grenade rolling off the wing.
well, that was the first time the Marine Corps had air support.
That's cool.
But Dad and I we got to talking about